We are living in the age of overflowing video content. Movies, TV shows, web series satisfy the demand for long form content, and we also have an endless stream of short form content on social media apps. In this ocean of content is a niche that appeals to people who want to stay closer to reality, and that is the niche of documentaries. There are documentaries available on nearly every subject these days, and video games are no exception. In this video, let us take a look at some of the well-known documentaries that cover the video game industry. Two things before we begin. First, let me point out that just like movies and TV shows, accessing some of these documentaries is not free. They are either sold directly or they are made available to watch on streaming sites which require a paid plan. But a large number of documentaries are available to watch for free on YouTube. We'll begin with a quick tour of some of the well-known paid options and then spend more time on the free options. Second, I'm only going to talk about documentaries that came out after 2010. This is because these are the newer documentaries which are easier to access today. There are some older ones available on YouTube as well, but since they are not the original copies, their quality is all over the place. So I'm only going to stick to the relatively newer ones. But if you are interested, you are free to dive deeper into the depths of YouTube and dig out some older docs as well. Okay, so first the paid options, and I would strongly recommend that you start with Indie Game the Movie. Released in 2012, this documentary tracks the lives of three teams of indie game developers and their varying approaches of work. The selection of games to showcase in the movie is what makes this feature special. Instead of making a generic film talking about the highs and lows of indie games, we learn about a game that has already been released and has met with great success, a game that was getting ready to launch when the film was being produced, and a game that was still in early development when the film was being produced. This format of using the past, present, and future allowed the viewers to experience all sides of the development story, and for someone who has no clue into how this world works, this movie acts as a great introduction. I feel it is still relevant 12 years later. The only thing to remember is that even back in 2012, when there was not as much competition as today, releasing a hit game is not as easy as uploading a trailer and waiting for the money to roll in. Next, we have a dose of history in the form of Console Wars. This documentary is based on a book of the same name, and it talks about the battle between Nintendo and Sega for the domination of the North American video game market in the late 80s and the early 90s. Sega eventually lost the war due to internal conflicts and stopped producing consoles altogether. Nintendo also stepped out of the limelight for several years before returning stronger than before with the Wii and Switch consoles. It's an interesting story, and the documentary is well produced with a mixture of interviews and animated stories. Finally, in my short list of paid options, there is High Score, a 6-part series on Netflix that documents the history of video games from the 70s to the 90s. Since this series came out in 2020, I was a bit puzzled as to why they stopped in the 90s and didn't go further, or at least release a second season. But either way, this series is a good starting point for anyone curious to see the growth of the industry. It features interviews from many industry veterans like Nolan Bushnell of Atari, Roberta and Ken Williams of Sierra Interactive, Tom Kalinske of Sega, and many more. Now let's move on to some free options. All of the remaining documentaries featured here are available to stream on YouTube for free at the time of recording this episode. Links to each of them are given in the description. We'll begin with two sets of incredibly long and excellent documentaries, both featuring the same game studio, Double Fine Adventure and Double Fine Psych Odyssey. These are multi-episode stories documenting the development of two games by Double Fine Productions, Broken Age and Psychonauts 2. These two documentaries offer a very close look at the inner workings of a video game studio over the span of nearly 10 years. Of course, People do behave differently when they are in front of a camera, but this is as close as we'll ever get to see how a professional game studio works without ever stepping foot inside one. These stories have it all: drama, suspense, heartbreaking twists, and more. It all ends on a seemingly positive note when Double Fine gets acquired by Xbox Game Studios, but this means they are no longer independent, so it is a bittersweet moment. Next, we have Video Games the Movie, another old documentary that focuses on the history of the industry. It is now over 10 years old, but it does feature interviews with many industry veterans, so it is worth a watch. Moving on to something more recent, there is Power On, a documentary series produced by Xbox. It details the history of the Xbox consoles, starting from how a small group of Microsoft employees pitched the idea to Bill Gates to the reveal of the Xbox Series X. The story stops short of what happened after the Series X launch, but it offers many insights into the decisions taken by the Xbox team over the years. Currently, questions are being raised whether there will even be another Xbox console, and if Microsoft ever steps out of the console business, this series does a good job of documenting the Xbox legacy. Now let's talk about PlayStation. Now, as far as I know, Sony has not commissioned a full-scale documentary like Xbox. There have been a few third-party documentaries talking about the PlayStation's history, and Sony releases these small features whenever they launch a new console, but we don't have anything on the scale of Power On by Xbox. Instead, what we usually get is deep dives into the making of some of PlayStation's biggest games. Two such examples are Grounded, the making of The Last of Us, and God of War, Raising Kratos. They offer a glimpse into what it is like working at a Sony first-party studio and the amount of work that goes into creating some of the biggest games ever made. That pretty much wraps up the one-off documentaries available on YouTube. But this episode will be incomplete if I don't mention a third-party company that has dedicated itself to producing video game documentaries and has been doing an excellent job since 2016. I'm talking about NoClip, the media company run by Danny Otvire, a former games journalist. The company is entirely crowdfunded and all of their work is put up for free, so the fact that they've been surviving for so long speaks to their quality. These documentaries are different from the video essays and other stuff on YouTube because Danny's crew actually talks to the developers and tells their stories. This is important for smaller teams who may not have the budget to produce their own behind-the-scenes documentaries. My particular favorite series on NoClip is the series covering the development of Hades, the roguelite action title from Supergiant Games, and it is one of their best performing series as well, if I'm not wrong. So as you can see, there's quite a wide variety of content available in the world of video game documentaries. There are still many more that I haven't talked about and even more that I am not even aware of. So if you ever need a break from playing video games, why not spend some time watching some people talk about how they made those games that you love? Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.